right, so now we would like to get to know you all a little bit better. So the first question now should have populated on your phones. So if you take a look, there are a few questions on there. I think there are actually 3 or 4. So we'll just give folks a moment to look those over.
Could you define what an adult child is? Is that what age?
Adult child. You know what? If you think they're an adult child, then I think that's
It doesn't apply to me. I'm sure people are wondering that.
That's a fair question. Yeah, I mean, well, if it's the parents asking, then I'd say, do you think that they should be out of the house?
Do you consider them a child?
Yes, you consider them a child. Yeah, but I think maybe, you know, whatever you interpret as a non-standard age to be still living in the house, or, you know, a multi-generational family is another way of putting it too. Okay, so we still have time to answer questions, but, and I can only really use the folks in the room as a gauge. But I will go ahead and start clicking through some of these just so we can kind of see, but the poll should still be active. So we have a lot of folks who lost your home in the Marshall Fire. It makes a lot of sense, and we're really grateful that you're here tonight. And then it looks like we've got a lot of representation from Centennial 8. Wow, some neighborhood organizers in there, huh? That's awesome. Okay. Okay, Cold Creek Ranch filing, Centennial Heights. Okay, now we're getting some more coming in. Scroll down a bit. Nice. So some folks are caring for parents who live in their household or might in the future. Majority no. Any adult children live in your household? Mostly no. Some yes, and maybe a possibility in the future. And partly I want to read these out so we all know, but also to give people time, of course, to be able to answer the survey questions. Okay. So what's tonight going to look like? We're going to start by just sort of giving you the overview of the entire project.
So far, you know, what kind of got us up to this point? You know, so following Marshall Fire, there have been a number of times where this topic has come up with you all, expressing interest in allowing ADUs, or at least discussing whether ADUs should be allowed as part of the rebuilds within your neighborhood. So City Council heard you, and they added that to your work plan, to their work plan for 2023. You have a couple City Council members here tonight who I think are just, you know, kind of wanting to hear what you all have to say about this. So we talked about this a little bit through the Marshall Fire neighborhood liaisons. I did with them a couple weeks ago just to kind of introduce it, let them know that it was coming up. But we also want to know that, let you all know that in addition to your neighborhoods, that as a city, we're going to be talking about this more broadly through the upcoming housing plan, the comprehensive plan. And so this isn't, I think we're fast tracking your conversation just because of the timeliness related to rebuilding, but this will be a citywide discussion, but it's, you know, we just kind of wanted to be able to do this with you all in a little distinct and different way.
Yeah, and then so tonight, Lisa and I are going to go through some basic definitions around ADUs, some of the key considerations that can go into allowing them and regulating them. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be taking some, you know, input and direction from you all through this poll. And then we're also going to be, probably not tonight, maybe tomorrow when we post the meeting video, we're going to be opening an online survey. And you are welcome to also take that online survey. It's the same questions, and there's a question there that says, did you attend the open house? Just so, you know, we try to avoid double counting, but please, by all means, you know, especially if you're having tech issues, that's always an option. Another thing to know about the way that this is formatted, we will be asking whether you support ADUs at all, what your considerations, what your concerns are. But we're going to put that at the end after we go through a lot of the definitions, just so we're kind of all working with the same, you know, basic understanding of what we're talking about. And then what's next? So, you know, it really depends on kind of what we hear in the early surveys and at this open house, what additional research, what additional outreach needs to happen that we'll be hearing, you know, a little bit from you all tonight. So we're kind of just trying to be in that athletic position, keep our knees bent a little bit and see what folks are sharing with us. But right, if this were to go to public hearing, the plan would be, you know, planning commission and city council, of course. And then also just something to note about this is that during that process, these would also be the kind of notice where they would get mailed out to the surrounding properties as well. So even though for the most part here, this has been targeted toward folks who lost their homes or kind of really engaged in the Marshall Fire rebuild process, other folks who would also be impacted by these decisions will also kind of be getting direct mailings. And of course, everything is open to the public in general as well. So with that, what are accessory dwelling units other than tiny, cute houses in clip art form? So this is going to be just the real quick and dirty here at the beginning, but I think the important thing to just keep in mind throughout, right, is they're accessory dwelling units, and that means, right, that they are accessory to a main use and to a main structure. So this, we'll talk in a minute about how this differentiates between duplexes, but that's just something to keep in mind. And so through regulations and some of the choices that we're going to be talking about, you know, that's how a city and planning department can kind of make sure that it's still that accessory piece, that it doesn't become two dwelling units, you know, full-blown dwelling units on a property. So it is really its sort of own separate category. And also just to note that ADUs are not currently allowed anywhere in Louisville, but as Lisa mentioned, you know, there's going to be a housing study to look into that. So that's sort of that bigger question is sort of, it's definitely there, but it's kind of next to this project. Some other things, yeah.
Does an accessory dwelling unit have to be a completely separate structure from this house, or can it be like a separate unit in the basement or, you know, attached garage or something like that?
Yeah, that's great. So there, and for the folks online, we've got the question, you know, what are the different forms that an ADU can take? Do they have to be detached? And I will address that in just a second, but the answer is no. And I'll kind of show you the different forms they can take. So that's a great question. So communities can get interested in ADUs for a number of different reasons, and some of the big ones are up here on the screen. So affordability, right? They offer a different type of housing, and they can not only for the people living in ADUs, but also for the people who own the properties or living in the primary residences to be able to afford to live there. Another piece is, you know, the aging in place considerations to allow people to have multi-generational families, caretakers, you know, that kind of thing. And then also, of course, something we're really familiar with here, that there can be places, can't imagine who or where this would be, places that are growing really rapidly, right? And so this is another way to kind of potentially respond to having more people interested in living and working in a place than the housing stock can provide. So those are just some reasons why people can be interested in this. So there are, you know, sort of three general main types of ADUs. They can be internal, so you actually don't see them from the outside, just inside that primary dwelling. So, you know, if you imagine that you have a basement space that has a separate entrance, you put the kitchen down there, lock it off from above, and that could be your ADU. We've also got attached, which is sort of similar, but it's something that you would actually be able to see from the outside. And then detached is sort of the image that I was using previously, which is sort of completely separate building. So any of those could be ADUs. It's really kind of more of a use distinction. Is another way of thinking about it too. That there's sort of two families or two separate groups could be living at the same place and be sort of fully independent. And as I mentioned before, like, this is not a duplex. So some of the ways, you know, this is where that accessory piece comes to mind. And just in case, you know, people are curious about the difference, I think this image is a really great example of kind of what a classic duplex looks like. They have equal standing, if you will, right? So the two entrances are right up there up front. There's not, one is not designed to be accessory to the other in any way. And so that's not what's being proposed here. Accessory dwelling units are a totally different type of animal than duplexes, but worth to just note. And we can definitely talk about that more if people are interested in that. So now we're going to get into some of those key questions. What common decisions can communities make when adopting or considering adopting ADU ordinances? So just the really big picture, you know, here are some of the biggest questions, you know, that I think we're thinking about and that we've seen. So first of all, should the ADU look like the existing house in style and form? You know, especially for neighborhoods that might already have architectural regulations, which these neighborhoods don't quite as much, but still a potential consideration. How far away should the ADU be from the property line? Should the owner have to live on the property or on site? Is there a need to require off-street parking spaces for ADUs above and beyond what's already provided, right? So of course, we deal with those through these different types of regulations. There are many more that are up on the screen, but they can be designed, they can regulate the size, parking regulations, requirements that owners occupy the property, many more. And I hope this is clear, but just to really say it, tonight, we're not asking you to write the code for us. We're not asking you to say, I really prefer 800 square feet. Here's my thesis on why, or I'm really against it for this exact reason. And, we're really just looking for your input. And then it's our job to try to think about how can that become, regulatory. And of course, commissioners and council members are a big part of that.
Could you run that last slide back? Thanks, I just wanna take it. That's good, thank you.
So design. Design comes up in some communities more than others. This isn't necessarily a consideration that every community deems as important, but when we think about design, we're thinking about compatibility with the existing house on the lot that's already there, right? And more particularly around if you do maybe a detached unit off the back or an addition. So is design elements something that is important to you is a question that we'll be asking. And when we think about that, one way we can think about it is, should it have similar architectural styles such as roof line, roof pitch, that it really feels like, while maybe it's a separate structure, it definitely feels like it relates to the house on the lot. Window placement for privacy, sometimes that can come up for folks. And location of entrances, that can be a big consideration as far as keeping that community character to feel predominantly as a single family home. Right, so sometimes communities will say, you can't have two front doors, and it's, looks like a duplex, like the second entrance needs to be, maybe set back a little bit or around from the side. So when we think about design regulations, we want to know how important design regulations are to you generally, and whether or not you feel strongly that we need to, really dive into those, or if you're generally more comfortable with some flexibility around design. I think, practically speaking, for most of your neighborhoods, we would imagine that these would be internal ADUs. There's not a lot of room with, with rear setbacks being what they are, to probably add a detached structure on most of these rebuilt lots, right? So for most circumstances, these would probably just out of constraint be internal, but they don't have to be, right? Unless we hear from you that you really want to restrict that. So just some design considerations for you to think about.
Okay, so another thing, right, to consider, and that can potentially be regulated, is requiring off-street parking. So this is already part of, any kind of residential consideration, and this is a common community concern when talking about ADUs. In general, the research that's been done on this generally reveals that additional parking isn't necessary. It's not sort of the issue that people might imagine. But again, still a common concern. And I think sort of like what Lisa was just saying about the constraints on the property, in this case, we've kind of got the opposite situation where a lot of these houses are being built with 2-car, 3-car garages plus space on the driveway. So actually being built with more than what's the minimum required parking anyway. So that's also something to consider.
So size regulations come up quite frequently, and they can present in different ways, right? So, and really we think about regulating size so that we're limiting, I think, the overall impact of a second unit on the lot. And again, ensuring that it is secondary and accessory and it doesn't become a duplex. And so you can kind of look at it a couple different ways, depending on an overall maximum. So you could say, no ADU will be larger than 800 square feet or 1,000 square feet. Alternatively, some communities prefer to regulate it as a percentage of the overall structure. Generally it's never more than 50%. It's not an accessory, but so what maybe is a right ratio. So we're not going to again ask for the specific number from you tonight, but we really would like to know if regulating size is important to you.
Okay, so setbacks and location. This is sort of the same principle, right, as would apply to a primary structure. And then setbacks, right, they regulate everybody's experience. So the people living in the ADUs, the people who are living in the primary houses, the neighbors on the neighboring lots. And they also, I think one of the things that we've been thinking about is that really, how do you provide a balance with providing enough space from neighboring property lines, right, of course, but then also, especially in these cases, with these houses already on the lots, that you have enough space between, especially if you have the detached and the accessory for things like privacy and fire safety. So that's something that if folks are really interested in setbacks and will probably be considering setbacks no matter what, it's our bread and butter. But, that's something that we'll keep in mind too, is to make sure that these lots can actually meet the regulations, but also provide enough spacing. And also the other thing that can come up with setbacks is just keeping in mind, are you effectively regulating people out of being able to access ADUs, especially in the detached? If they want to have detached, if you have really intense setbacks, that can kind of limit where people can have them to the point where they cannot, right?
Minimum lot size. So this comes up in some communities. Within the rebuild areas, we see a pretty big range of lot sizes. And really, they generally, when communities decide to establish a minimum lot size, it's really for the purpose of, I think ensuring privacy within the lot itself and then impacting around the neighbors. And also, if you have a street with maybe a lot of small lots, you might see a little more on-street parking than maybe you do on the homes with, larger lots. So it's really just a way to kind of help limit impact on neighborhoods that are already, fairly tight together. But again, with an internal ADU, it might not be a consideration for you to regulate a minimum lot size. We would probably want to understand if this is important to you. We would have to do some research and figure out kind of the spread of lot sizes. We know, but try and understand kind of where that fits in balance with kind of all of the other regulations that we are seeking feedback on.
Maximum building coverage, not all of the neighborhoods. In fact, I think the majority of neighborhoods don't have a lot coverage requirement, but for those that do, this might be particularly relevant. And then the question really is, should ADUs count towards maximum building coverage or should they not? The benefits are, kind of again, in keeping the community character and sort of scale, to whatever it is and whatever you imagine that to be, the kind of sort of serving that community character piece. But then, in that case, the drawbacks might also be that, again, it's maybe regulate people out of being able to have an attached or a detached structure. And then also, with all of these pieces, if there's a desire to incentivize this and really allow it to happen, this is one of those other pieces that we'd really want to hear, like, what is the concern, and is this something that you really want to see? You're really concerned about things like scale, then we might, pull this tool out and kind of consider using this as well.
So owner occupancy, some communities require that the property owner actually live in one of the two units, not necessarily the primary unit. Maybe the owner actually lives in the ADU. If they're, single and they are fine renting the primary house out to a family. So again, some communities just, have determined that that's important to them. It doesn't necessarily, doesn't prevent a renter from moving in the one unit or the other, but we are interested to know if that's something that you feel like should be regulated. It's very common, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think there's research, growing trends, I think, are showing that property management and maintenance doesn't always depend on if the owner lives on the property or not. You can have a well-maintained property with the owner on site. You can also have a property that's not necessarily well-maintained, even if the owner's on site. So we just want to know if that's important to you. Go ahead, John.
A question that's related to this, because I think it strikes the same motivation in what it said, but it's a different distinction, is whether or not you can rent out you. Because having an ADU that, if it's a multi-generational home that grandma or grandpa live in, is a different situation than what you're describing, where the owner lives in the ADU and renting out the main property. Because I think I suspect that distinction would matter to people.
So we don't have a question on that tonight. I think when we wrote this, we are going to ask you a couple of questions around how would you use an ADU? Would it be for a guest house, for guests? Would it be for a family member? Would it be for a rental? If that's important to you, to actually craft a distinction to say that it can't be rented separately, we would want to know that, because that's not a question that we're asking you. Generally, I don't believe most communities say that it can't be rented out. I think that is one of the actual primary reasons to create an ADU ordinance, is to allow flexibility in who can occupy that the property owner gets to make those decisions. So.
Can I ask you had asked, were you imagining more like the Airbnb short-term rental piece, or are you thinking of renting in general?
Either.
Either, okay, yeah, because I think an important distinction too is that we're not proposed, this wouldn't likely, and because everybody's like. Would not likely have anything to do with Airbnbs, they're not allowed in the city, it's not part of this
Yeah.
consideration. So this would really be, and the distinction is like 30 days or longer, right? So it really would be those longer term rentals, multiple families or multiple people who are really staying there over a longer period of time.
And I get to it because if you were asked people, are you okay with having this one property that is currently a single family home become a multifamily home? I think the answer would be different if you ask, okay, the single family home, are you okay if it's a multi-generational home? And I think the answer, if you were to poll those two separate questions, I think the answers would be very different.
We can add that question to the online survey. We won't capture it tonight. Go ahead, Rob.
I would say most ordinances that we've seen, even though they're allowed to be rented, they usually have an occupancy limit that's very different. It doesn't have to be that way,
Yeah.
but most of them will limit it to, maybe 2 or 3 people, regardless of so you can't rent to a family of 5, so it becomes very limited. Theoretically. So
And we do
that's-
have an like house number, like how many people can live in it question, but.
Yeah.
We have a question online. Since we've taken a few in the room, let's go ahead and we'll take a question online.
So one of the questions that came was, Airbnb and VRBO are increasingly used for 30-day plus rentals, question mark. Is that the distinction, long-term versus short-term, question mark?
So that's a good question. Within the city code right now, the city doesn't allow rental terms of less than 1 month, but we do allow within a single family dwelling, a rental term of 1 month or longer. And so that is kind of the distinction from the city code regarding rental limitations. And that's why short-term rentals and the more traditional, as we know at Airbnb, pop in for a weekend, those are not allowed under that 30-day or 1 month minimum rental.
And I want to say too, there is a section at the very end where it's a pretty form response. So please, these are really great questions and add those in there as well as going online, just so we can capture this interest.
Do we also still have a requirement of no more than 2 unrelated people in the same unit? So it would be 2 in each?
So, yes, so the question is, right now, we have limitations on number of people who are unrelated who can live together in a single family home. So we would imagine that this regulation would be in addition to who the limitation in this single family home, that there would be kind of a separate allowance for folks in the EDU. Looks like we have a hand raised.
That
Is a follow-up. Oh, okay. Okay, how about we move on and we'll keep going.
Yeah, did you guys?
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I think you answered it, but I just want to make the distinction. I know that a lot of people refer to Airbnbs as short-term rentals, but it's a technology platform that actually facilitates long-term rentals, executive rentals, 30-day plus. My family lost their home in the fire. We had an Airbnb for 5 months. So I just want to be clear. We're talking about 30-day plus rentals, not Airbnb, because Airbnb actually does both, right? So
You are correct. We're not regulating the platform for which folks rent properties. So if they
okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
thank you.
So Airbnb is a common term. So sorry if that caused confusion on that.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah, we're not taking on Airbnb tonight. Okay, so we're gonna move on, but these are great questions. Thank you so much. So what matters to you? This is where we'd like to see some of those phones back up. And sort of take a look, and I'm gonna open the poll now, I think in 1 slide. So this is just a summary slide, just to kind of remind everybody what we've talked about: size, location, ownership requirements, maximum building coverage, parking issues, design. There's some of the things we've already talked about that you're gonna be asked about, in addition to some broader questions. Okay, so it's up on my phone. Let's wait a couple more seconds. Okay, you can still be working on the survey, but I'm gonna start showing folks what the answers are. Okay, so architectural compatibility with existing home. Okay, this looks like it's actually important to folks. And I can toggle back between these two. Location of entrances, this is another design piece. Under occupancy of the property. Okay, so far a lot of interest in most of these. Off-street parking. Okay. And yeah, just the 5-star is very important. The 1 is lower, and then sort of 3s are right there in the middle. This isn't labeled. Maximum occupancy 2. Okay.
Can I ask a question about that? So I feel like that is missing some information. So as an example, if you had an ADU that had 3 bedrooms, it could be appropriate to have 3 people in there, kind of depending on the size. If you had one that only had 1 bedroom, then maybe 2 is that. So I think that's like an incomplete question.
Okay, so we had a question about, how many bedrooms and what can the ADU actually hold, basically in terms of people living there. And so are you imagining that we have like, okay, if it's a 3-bedroom home, then the max occupancy is 3, like a scaled system? Is that kind of what you're
Yes,
thinking?
I think that should be explored at any rate.
That's a great question, and most communities will limit the size.
Mhm.
And so let's say you're limiting to 800 square feet, which is a common size that people limit ADUs to. That's gonna limit how many bedrooms you have ultimately as well. So these things work together.
Mhm.
And so you're absolutely right. If we end up allowing 1,200 square foot ADUs, then you might be able to get 3 bedrooms really comfortably in there.
Mhm.
So it's a good point, yeah.
So I made a note of that, but thank you very much. Yeah. Maximum size. Okay, pretty small. And on the online survey, that'll open up tomorrow, I kind of did a comparison that 600 square feet. I think that's in the realm of like a 2 or 3 car garage. And then, so 1,000 square feet is like a roomy 2-bedroom.
Is there going to be an opportunity to discuss that? I'd just be so curious why people would prefer 600 square feet. Yeah.
So yeah, I think for the folks in the room, I think we'll certainly, once we kind of get through the presentation, we'll do more of an informal dialogue, and then I'll be doing the same with the group online. And again, this is the very start of this conversation with you all, right? I think if we get a sense that there's consensus, then we'll probably draft around what we hear tonight after the online survey. But, really, we want this to be kind of a neighborhood driven conversation as well. We don't want to get in front of you all collectively on this.
Yeah, a good reminder that we can discuss these more broadly when we split up as well, but also questions now are great too. Okay, so how would you use an ADU? So I think let's just toggle back and see the early ones. It looks like it's pretty consistent. Okay. Okay, so not to give anybody like too much flashing screen, sorry. Okay, so how would you use an ADU? Need next set of questions. And the poll should be live. You can watch the results.
This was going out again, I would include a caregiver. Because that is another primary thing that makes ADUs something that
that's a
benefit
good
the community.
Great, I can add that to the online survey. So far, it looks like we're kind of seeing, not quite, but kind of an even split about different uses. So I'm gonna go on to the next one. Should ADUs be allowed in your neighborhood? Do you support ADUs? This should be a several parter, so I'm gonna give everybody just a couple minutes. Yeah.
They had a hand raised online. I think we'll go ahead and.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this refers to the previous poll. I didn't see the option that it might be for, honestly, a future caregiver for an elderly couple or person.
That's a great comment. It came up in the room, so we're gonna add that to the online.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna start toggling, but looks like Angela's still coming in. Okay, so got the strongly disagree, strongly agree. Okay, so you'd be interested in adding an ADU? Okay. Next. And then what type of ADUs? Okay, so majority support for a basement converted to an ADU. Even split among the rest.
Just to be clear, that means a separate entrance.
For the
And,
basement,
and a kitchen.
right,
Okay.
exactly. And I want to pause and make sure, did we get pictures of the? Okay, awesome. Okay, so. You see some of these. We're talking about crowding, pollution. We've got affordable housing, multi-generational, we've got sort of all of the points we kind of talked about. Okay, the single family zoning. So did not want ADUs for that reason. Vested interest for people renting ADUs. Okay. Traffic again, cars. Okay, future proofing my home, so sort of age in place. Need for space goes down. More housing. Okay, so these are kind of coalescing around some of the pieces. And I'm gonna do something a little awkward here. I'm actually gonna take some pictures of this. The online, when you go on the website for Slido, it says that you can download it to Excel file. I'm always a little skeptical of what is possible. So I like to have little backups, just to grab a little bit of what we're seeing here.
So I have a question for you. Since traffic seems to be the biggest common thread that people are concerned with, and I think a year ago, we witnessed the side effect of a lot of cars on the road at one time when it was an emergency.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to like how popular ADUs, and I'd say that even though they're not really allowed, probably have about 20% of people want to do them. if we allow it, what are we looking at? 50% of homes that happen now and 50% increase in part or 30% increase in part?
I think that's a really good question. So we don't know how this is gonna play out in Louisville, but I think most communities experience when they allow ADUs is you don't see a proliferation of ADUs in every other home across the neighborhood. For one, not everybody's interested, and I think we might see that a little bit in that slide up there, is these aren't for everyone. And then they're expensive to build, you know, you have to manage, do you even want to manage it? So I think anecdotal evidence from other communities would indicate that these don't happen in a vast majority of homes. They still remain a really small subset of the overall number of homes within a neighborhood that does this. So I think we would definitely be an outlier if we saw a large number of ADUs come in, just candidly. It doesn't mean it can't happen, you know, and we didn't talk about that tonight, but I think if that's a concern, one tool that we're not asking about is, you know, do you want to put a cap in the neighborhood overall? Right, so if you are concerned, you know, maybe it creates a little bit of a competition, and we don't want to propose that for you. But if that's a concern that you all have overall, there are tools that some communities do adopt that, you know, no more than X in a neighborhood, or they have to be so far apart or away from one another. So you can give us feedback if that's something overall.
And I would. Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Yeah.
What's the maximum allowable unrelated adults
2
in a home? 2,
unrelated.
really?
And then, so the family of, yes, you can have, yeah. Go ahead, Ron.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think if we were looking at this community-wide, having a density or spacing requirement is certainly something a lot of cities do. I think because we're also looking at it within the rebuild areas, it's really complicated. But I think, you know, so it depends on how the city decides to look at it. If we look at it citywide, or if we just look at it in the rebuild areas, could dictate that a little bit. That is a common concern. And I think that the occupancy limit, a lot of cities have changed, but ours is pretty old to allow only on two unrelated people. A lot of cities have revisited that recently, but that's a big discussion for the city. A lot of people would have different opinions about that. Especially being close to a college town, is where you see a lot of students renting houses.
Okay, so not to pause you, but actually we're getting to the 15-minute mark by the end of the hour. So it might be a good time to actually move and then split so we can continue these conversations separately. If you don't mind, so don't forget what you were raising your hand about. But just a couple of things to note. So from here, kind of talked about this already. Community input, that's the stage we're at now. Planning Commission, City Council would be potentially in the future, and really again trying to be flexible and responsive about timelines, what we're hearing from everybody. And then here's you know, I guess our request of you moving forward, if you would work with us, is to share the survey with the folks who aren't here tonight. Because only so many people can come, many people didn't even know about it, right? So the folks that you think, wow, they would really have an opinion about this, or this would really impact them, please share the survey. It's online, it's on the Engage Louisville webpage. You can also grab the QR code up there if you're quick with your camera. But those are kind of just that's the really big ask moving forward, just to make sure we get as much input as possible. And again, you're welcome to go on the online survey, add in, you know, change your responses, you know, whatever you'd like. So now we're going to split up, and I want to check in and make sure.
My computer's being weird. Somebody use Ellie's, but we're gonna go out and call so that we're not interfering.
Okay. Well, everybody online and everybody here, thank you so much for coming. And I'm actually going to probably just turn off my whole Zoom thing so we don't get any funkiness. And then 3 of us are here in the room to kind of take notes, listen, answer questions and everything for you all. All right.
Hi, everybody. Lisa Ritchie here. I'm gonna look like I'm Ellie, but for some reason my computer wasn't cooperating. So we want to do a little bit more of a Q&A with you all who are attending online. to be able to have the opportunity to ask some questions and share your feedback. So Elizabeth is going to kind of help me keep an eye on the Q&A, but I'm going to start. I would say if you want to share some thoughts, raise your hand, and let's go with Leslie. You'll have to unmute on your side, Leslie.
Lisa, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Elizabeth, are you hearing her?
Yeah,
Oh,
just
sorry.
fine. Can you?
There we
hear
go.
me?
Go
Okay.
ahead. My
can hear you.
speaker was off. Go ahead, Leslie, start over.
Okay. Yeah, no, I am very interested in ADUs as a potential for our home as we rebuild. I've got an aging father. I've got 2 young kids that are looking at being in college soon. And as expensive as housing is getting in Louisville and the surrounding areas, I'm really hoping to kind of look forward at our house and be able to create spaces to either have multi-generational families, like my kids come home and they have a family and they live in the basement, or potentially age in my house and then rent the entire house out and we just stay on, or have a caretaker there. So I'm very interested in ADUs for our neighborhood.
Thank you for sharing your feedback. Larry Donner.
Yes, thank you. I would just suggest whatever you do, I would make it for the entire city rather than just doing it for the rebuilds, because quite honestly, I'm tired of being singled out and specialized for just rebuilds, as happened in recent code discussions. Thank you.
Certainly fair feedback. All right, Jerry McQueen. Oh, there you go, Jerry.
Okay, now you probably can hear me.
Yeah.
I'm a little conflicted about this issue because on one hand, I have one of the largest lots in Coal Creek Filing 3, so an ADU is certainly feasible, but on the other hand, and I support like the social goals of supporting multi-generational housing or a single caretaker living with a particular resident, but watching both my kids attended CU, they rented housing off campus, and just watching how when the money is there, the rules will be bent and driven through. We technically there at the time my son was there, no more than 3 unrelated people were allowed in the house, but there were 5. And as soon as Boulder made some moves to increase it, they just increased the rent accordingly. So, it is a windfall to current property owners, but it's I think this is the unintended side effects need to be looked at.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Let's go to Audrey.
Hi, thank you so much for providing this opportunity today. I'm really excited that ADUs are on the council's work plan. I'm really supportive of this. We are wanting to diversify the intended use of our home, recognizing our kids are in college. And also my husband is disabled and on a fixed income. And so we're interested in having the potential to rent it out in some capacity, perhaps in the future. I do think it's really important that as part of your public education that you are talking about the housing crisis in Boulder County and really in the Denver region, but especially Boulder County, and that all communities, including Louisville, need to be a part of the solution to allow, new tools to diversify the cost of housing and to be a more inclusive community of people from all different walks of life and socioeconomic levels. So for those social reasons, as well as for our personal reasons, I'm really excited about this and hope we can make it happen for fire victims or for the community at large, as Larry mentioned. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Let's see. Next up, we have Frank Price. Go ahead, Frank.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I'm very much in favor of ADUs. My wife and I are building a home as fire victims. And, a lot of the reasons already said, multi-generational use, which, honestly is absolutely allowed regardless of an ADU. It just makes it much more challenging if we don't have the support from the city. Because having your college kids come home and live with you or your aging parents is something that can't be regulated by the city. So why not, accommodate that with having, better housing needs met? I also agree with the comments on housing crisis. Look, a lot of us are older in Louisville and getting older, but younger generations are going to change this whether we want it or not. So we can't resist what is coming. Like, we have to think about socioeconomic impact. And our home that we are building actually, can accommodate that. And we'd like to be part of the solution and not be resistant to, the wave of the future on this. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Frank. Next up, let's have Tanya. Let's see, here we go. Tanya, go ahead.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for taking our comments. I'd just like to say, our neighborhood already had 2 illegal ADUs in it. And, some of the people, there was a couple with twins living in one, and they were really nice, and they were saving up money and looking if they could buy in our neighborhood. And I would have been pleased if they could have found a way to be permanent neighbors there. There's just so many reasons. This opens up a big world. One of the problems with rebuilding our neighborhood is that a lot of people aren't going to come back, and we're going to end up with we had a really broad, beautiful socioeconomic age, group in our neighborhood. And this is one of the ways to sort of bring that back. Not just people who can build and live in, $1.2 million homes. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see my kids be able to, live in the ADU if they want to get established. I think this is the direction Louisville should be going. And I hope also Louisville will consider legitimizing some of the existing ADUs out there. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on this, Tanya. Next up, we have Eric.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to make 2 comments. One was I would like to endorse Larry Donner's comment about if you want to look at an ADU situation, make it for all of Louisville and don't just single out neighborhoods that were affected by the fire. I completely support that notion. Also with Jerry, who I don't know, what he's talking about in terms of college students and illegals and stuff like, illegal ADUs, stuff like that. I grew up in Boulder from 1959 all the way through college, and I can definitely support his caution about that sort of thing, because that's the way Boulder's lived for a very long time. And speaking of the city of Boulder, one of the reasons that you have a housing crisis is due to the failed policies of Boulder as a municipality since the 1960s with their growth control. Okay, and so I came to Louisville to get away from that certain situation in Boulder. They gentrified themselves very early in the game. And I see Louisville as its own town with its own people, and we're not here to bail Boulder out of its failed policies. And that's the end of my rant. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts, Eric. Next up, we have Beth.
Hi, I've lived in Boulder County since 2000, and I've lived in Louisville since 2005. And I am a Marshall Fire survivor, and I work with Marshall Fire families every day. And I just want to acknowledge there are thousands of Louisville residents who have never been able to afford a single family home. I'm one of them. I've been in a condo since 2005, which is smaller than 800 square feet. I'm a homeowner. I'm a long-term resident. And there are, hundreds, if not thousands of renters who lost their homes in the Marshall Fire. And we all need places to live. And so I'm fully in support of ADUs. And I hear that there are a lot of ways we can make sure that there's an extra parking space, do other things to help make sure that they fit into the community. And I also really support making incentives for landlords who are able to offer affordable housing. For instance, the city can help with financing, help them find general contractors, find pre-approved plans for ADUs, give tax breaks, et cetera, in agreement with people who are able to keep a unit affordable. We have goals in our town of having, I can't remember, but 20% of the new housing being affordable. So I think this is an opportunity to incentivize that. Obviously, not everyone will be able to do that, but it is a potential opportunity for a lot of, teachers, firefighters, single people who don't have two incomes, who are really important parts of this community and need places to live. Thanks.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks for all you're doing with the recovery work. So if anyone else has comments, we would love to hear them. I would say go ahead and please raise your hand. In the meantime, I do want to just say that, regarding overall housing within the city, we are about to kick off a housing study, a housing plan, and that will look at housing needs overall within the city, general support for alternative housing types for where maybe affordable housing is appropriate within the city. And we're going to be doing a deep dive into a lot of data and really understanding more about what our need is, what's driving housing within Louisville, where are our gaps, things like that. So I would say stay tuned for that this year. It's going to be a big year with respect to planning efforts. Following up shortly on that, we'll be undertaking the city's update to the comprehensive plan. And so through that plan, we really embed policy regarding future land use decisions. And so I would say, please continue to stay engaged citywide. We want to hear from everyone in that process where we can talk more about housing needs throughout the city in addition to this. And really, I want to share, I think City Council felt that they wanted to give you the opportunity to have this conversation early, knowing that so many of you are already rebuilding. It might be a little late for some of you, but not for everyone, to make some of these decisions if you want to add an ADU to your rebuild. And so that was really their motivation, not necessarily to single you out from my understanding, but just for those of you that want to take advantage of the opportunity while you're under construction, they wanted to afford you that opportunity. So I do think that was their motivation on that. I would love it if any more hands want to pop up. If not, there we go. One more. Go ahead. M, it says M.
Yes, Martha.
Martha.
So my father-in-law built ADUs in Boulder. I'm trying to think 40 years ago when I moved to Boulder. They were smaller units, but it added to crowding, it added to extra cars. It was not, and he was my family, and I could not say that I really supported what he was doing. So that's that hand. My son and daughter-in-law and I lived together for 3 years. They have just recently moved out. They went through the fire with me, and it was a lovely situation. I don't know that that was considered an ADU or not because we didn't have a separate kitchen. But if you have family members, I guess I don't understand the distinguishment between ADU and just having family, multi-generation people live together. So that can be explained later, but there's ways to have people live in homes that are, within that limit of unrelated within that limit without having separate buildings. I don't mind having people rent in homes, but when you have separate buildings, that's when it creates that visual crowdedness, which I guess I think a lot of us moved to Louisville because it was this cutesy, smaller town. It wasn't packed in with people as some of the other places were. So I guess I'm for ADUs if it's just within the home structure, but as far as building, more units, I don't like that. And I'm not even sure that I like the idea of long-term. I mean, we are in a single family neighborhood, as people have pointed out. And so I guess those are my comments. Thank you very much for tonight's meeting.
Thanks, Martha. All right, John. Oh, John Huey, if you want to pop back on, feel free. Go ahead, John. You'll have to unmute on your side.
There we go. Got it. So regarding the multi-generational family aspect that is currently legal in Louisville, as far as I understand, right?
Sorry, so clarify your question again.
So you can have related people in your family
Correct.
live in your house.
Yes,
So,
you can have extended family live within your house, and some people have a separate kitchen, you know, over the years, there's been a lot of them have been added, but you don't, there's no restriction against having family live with you. Yeah.
so you could essentially have an ADU that can only be used by family members, right? With its own kitchen,
To
bathroom,
regulate, but
bedroom.
yes. Yep, that can be a regulation.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. But with that, you know, our house that we're building right now is ideally situated to convert space above the garage into an ADU. And that was intended, as my wife Leslie talked about, with her dad aging in place, or maybe possibly our kids boomeranging back. So that's good to know that we could convert that space legally, even without the ADU regulation. But with that said, I'm still for, you know, allowing ADUs in Louisville. Thank you.
Great, thanks for your feedback. All right, let's give everybody another opportunity to raise hands before we. Eric, if you'd like to go ahead again. Go ahead, Eric.
Sorry. So I was going to add that I do sympathize with the plight of people like that young woman talking about people who work in Louisville that are renters, that are behind the curve in terms of buying their own houses, and they need some place to live. I think that's a use case that's tailor-made for a citywide effort to help in a situation like that. Because if you have a lot of people like that, then I question whether ADUs can scale enough to put a dent in that what you really need is a citywide look at that. If you can't house the workers that are working in your community, then you do have an issue. Also, I wanted to point out real quick for those that may not know this, that Markel Homes is one builder who is offering some plans up to the city for developing an area that's really near the downtown, but has very little building on it. That includes a lot of this affordable housing for people, right? It's land that hasn't been developed yet, that butts up on land that might be converted. I just don't know the details. But anyway, it's a fairly substantial set of units that Markel is proposing. And then of course you have all those acres of land out at Red Tail. So it would seem to me that the city has plenty of opportunity to offer affordable housing for the people who work here, outside of the ADU issue. Okay, so I think that when you have an ADU discussion, it should be broadened to include those other options, because those can scale, right? When you get developments like Red Tail or what Markel is promoting, then you're looking at a noticeable impact on the affordable housing. That doesn't make traffic situations go away necessarily, but I just wanted to point that out. Okay, that there's that there are options here and we should consider them. And and I like Martha's comments too. Louisville, it's nice to know that there's more than one person in Louisville that escaped Boulder, because for those of us who were refugees from Boulder, we do have our own views. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. I did see a question pop up in the chat around timeline and next steps. So I think that's a great reminder. So we really, again, the survey on Engage Louisville, we're going to update it with some of the questions that popped up tonight to get some additional feedback from you, but that should go live tomorrow. We're going to leave that open for 2 weeks. And once we see that, we'll figure out kind of where we go from here. If it's evident through, all of the collectively, the survey results, we feel like there's, good consensus from you all on key issues and key elements and overall support, then we will draft an ordinance and begin the public hearing process. Alternatively, if we feel like you all want to continue the conversation. Overall, you support ADUs, but we really need to spend some more time drilling down into one or two of these areas. We'll take the time to do that. But alternatively, if we really hear from a good portion of you that, you know what, this is either not the right time, not the right place, then, you know, this might not move forward at this time and just get, you know, wrapped in together with the overall housing study and comprehensive plan for the entire city. So timeline, I think, will respond to you all. So I would say the first step is to please share the survey, share the video with your friends and neighbors. We want to hear from everyone. I think the more feedback we can get, the better we can tailor this to really what meets your needs and what you all are looking for. So with that, any other last thoughts before we end the meeting? Okay. Well, thank you all very much for spending another evening with the city. I know we do this quite often, but it's always my pleasure to hear from you and work with you all and get to know you better. So please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions and stay tuned for more information as we hear from you all. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Oh, wait, sorry, I'm seeing some questions pop in. All right, just seeing some thank yous in the chat. Thank you, everybody. Have a really good night.